Welcome to Traveling Down, Biblical Archaeology for the 21st Century. Hi, I'm Gary Byers, and I'm here with our local rock star, Dr. Steve Collins.
Yeah, but we started doing archaeology back in the 20th century.
We did, but things have changed.
Yeah, things have moved on.
And so has the work at el-Hammam.
That's for sure.
Some amazing stuff has happened in our 15 years of excavation. And so today, let's talk about some of the different biblical periods that are represented there. You made the statement, every famous biblical character loved and wanted to be at el-Hammam.
They did. It seems like, I think we went through the Old Testament once, even New Testament, couldn't find a biblical character that didn't have some part of their story taking place right around the vicinity of where el-Hammam is located.
And that's north of the Dead Sea on the east side of the Jordan River. And it was, in Old Testament times and in New Testament times, a really famous, important site. And so we're going to talk about one of those periods today, and that's going to be the time with Moses and Joshua. So they wandered 38 years, wind up over in that area. And they're coming from the King's Highway, north-south road up on the Jordanian Plateau.
Right.
And they take a left-hand turn, turning west, and they come down the hill, and there's a site there, but it's not like we might think.
There's a big site there and a bunch of smaller sites around, but they're all ruins.
Yeah.
In fact, they've all been ruins for around 300 years.
Yeah.
So they're all just, and this one big site has a big tall upper hill, flat as a pancake, the lower hill as well, flat as a pancake, and very large, several hundred meters across, and it was a place to camp. It had gotten known after the destruction of Sodom, of course, is what destroyed the cities. After the destruction of Sodom, the area became known in the Egyptian literature as Abel. And the Egyptian map lists identify this place as Abel, which means a place of mourning, or to mourn a catastrophe. And then, of course, in the Bible, it picks up as Abel-Mitzrayim because there was another mourning event, M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G, to mourn at a funeral. And that happened when Joseph brought the body of Jacob to the site or to the area, probably because of its massive sort of holy, sacred megalithic field with dolmens and standing stones and all of the features that we've identified there. And so it says he brought Jacob there, and with Jacob, a whole entourage of Egyptians came along in honor of Joseph, in honor of his father, and they mourned. So it picked up a new name. It had been known as Abel, but now they called it Abel-Mitzrayim, the mourning of the Egyptians. And then later, when Moses and Joshua came along, around the latter part of the 14th century BC, it was called in the Bible Abel again, but this time Abel-shittim, which is a reference to the acacia trees that were now beginning to regrow around the area. And of course, acacias are those trees that some animals have a hard time getting to and eating because they have thorns all over them.
Yeah.
And I've gotten poked with one of those thorns because there are still today acacia trees growing around the site. But it becomes known as Abel-shittim. It says the Israelites, Moses and Joshua, and the Israelite army, and all the people in the Levitical camp with the tabernacle and the Ark of the Covenant, said they camped from Beth-jeshimoth to Abel-shittim along the Jordan. And most scholars, I didn't make this identification, but most scholars, before I ever came along with el-Hammam, had already identified el-Hammam as Abel-shittim. Now, it was not a town.
The Israelites had fought their way around the area up there in Transjordan, and when they came to camp there, interestingly enough, they weren't fighting. There was no one to fight.
Right. It seems like when they came down onto the plains of Moab, which is the old cities of the Kikkar area, and in fact, after when Joshua carved up the land, interestingly enough, he still calls it the Kikkar, but he calls it the Kikkar of the Valley of Jericho, because Jericho's the only city left on the Kikkar. All the cities on the other side of the Kikkar, Sodom and Gomorrah, Admah, Zebulun, have all been destroyed several hundred years earlier. So, it's interesting that when Moses and Joshua come down onto the plains of Moab, they're not fighting anybody.
Yeah.
Nobody's home. And so there's this one important strategic location. This site was an ancient city, but now the city's been like wiped out, destroyed, and in the 300 years or so between the destruction of Sodom and the time Moses showed up, the place is, with erosion, has just flattened out perfectly. It is, in fact, we found the top of that. I mean, and it's just as flat as a pancake. And so look at that. And it's lifted up 100 feet above the lower city, what had been the lower city. It's 200 feet above the surrounding plain. And so you can see from the top of it, you can see in 360 views, nobody's going to sneak up on it. It's a perfect place for Moses to put his command camp and to camp his soldiers and to camp the tribes.
So that's the location that way before we went to dig there, that others said this was Abel-shittim.
Right.
They didn't think about it being Sodom and Gomorrah, or later on the New Testament capital of Perea, Livius. But they'd already said, well, we think that's the most logical place because of all the things that you've said and described. So when Moses and Joshua got there, they would call it the Abel-shittim, the area, but up there on top had kind of a special name.
Yeah, I've seen so many maps, Bible maps, that are just, I don't know where they get this stuff, but they put names of cities, towns, or locations on maps. They have no clue why. They just stick them on there. So where would anybody put Abel-shittim? Well, once el-Hammam was seen as kind of a strategic location, they said, well, there it is. It's the last real important strategic site where you could camp before crossing the river. And that's on the Egyptian map list. It was pretty easy to identify. But where's Beth-jeshimoth? If they camp from Beth-jeshimoth to Abel-shittim, where's Beth-jeshimoth? And nobody, I've seen it stuck all over the place.
Now Beth-jeshimoth, house, Yeshimoth, desolation.
Yeah, in the Hebrew feminine plural, that word, now Yeshimon just means a wilderness, an uninhabited area. And in fact, when Balaam was looking at the children of Israel's camp from Nebo, from Pisgah, he looks down, and it says, he looks down to the uninhabited, the Yeshimon, the uninhabited wilderness below Pisgah. And so this is where the Israelites are camped. And so Yeshimon, and then there's the Beth-jeshimoth, and in the feminine plural, it means desolation, because nobody lived there.
Yeah.
The whole area had plants and everything else, and people had been wiped out by the destruction that took out Sodom. So, and so still the area can't support agriculture yet, but the thorny bushes are there, the thorny trees, the acacias are there, and but what's Beth-jeshimoth? The house of the desolation. I had no idea. I mean, I didn't have any more idea than anybody else had. But then, lo and behold, I think it was back around 2015, excavating down toward the palace. We already knew the palace was there. We had found it in some probes and in a couple of squares, and we were expanding our excavations further to the south and the west. And we ran into a building that was a little upsetting to me at first. It was like, what is this? But now I tried to call it Middle Bronze Age because the pottery is very similar.
Which would have been the time of Sodom, Middle Bronze
Which would have been the time of Sodom,
Yeah.
but it was up higher. It was just sitting on top of what we had already identified as the palace complex. And why? I just couldn't get it, and I made all kinds of theories, as to what it is. Maybe it was an upper story that pancaked down on top, and I had it all figured out.
I had some good ideas.
And but then I kept looking at the pottery. I sent it off to a few colleagues, and I'm going, I know what they're going to tell me. And they told me, it's LB2. This pottery's LB2. We've been telling people for 10 years up to that point that there is no LB at el-Hammam. Just period. There's no LB at el-Hammam. And all of a sudden we have an LB building. Now we know we don't have a late Bronze Age settlement. What this is because we've excavated all the sectors across the upper and lower city. And we've never found LB except here. And it's a building, it's a nice building.
Yes.
And it's small, maybe 10, 12 meters by 10, 12 meters, and built, kind of overbuilt, kind of government. It looks government to me.
Absolutely.
It's got scale pans, balanced scale pans. It's got amulets, not omelets, amulets.
Omelets.
And it's got all kinds of nice stuff, nice pottery, painted pottery. And it's kind of overkill. It's nothing you would find in a residential kind of domestic context. So it's a government building. We think it was a house, a structure, government structure built to collect taxes, kind of a customs house to collect fees, tolls from people on the roads, caravans, other travelers, even maybe marching armies, to pay up to whoever was controlling this piece of real estate at the time. Maybe Jericho, maybe the Moabites up on the hill, we don't know. But somebody was kind of making a living, making a little profit off being able to control the traffic on all the converging roads that came right at the foot of el-Hammam. Anyway, so there's this thing up there on the top. Now it's sitting, a singular freestanding building, on the top of a hulking ruin. Now if you built a building like that on the top of an obvious destroyed city, might you call it the house of the desolation?
Beth-jeshimoth.
Beth-jeshimoth is a literal house of the desolation. I mean, they may not have called it that, or maybe they did. The poor saps that had to man the place out there in the middle of nowhere at the time probably thought, what did we do wrong? Who'd we tick off to get this assignment? But yeah, here it was, a freestanding building. So we just thought, you know what? It has to be Beth-jeshimoth. This is the house. It's literally a house. It's the house sitting on the desolation. It's the house of the desolation. Now, I think Moses would have co-opted, and Joshua would have co-opted that house as a command camp. Moses would have put his command camp right on top of the upper city. He can see in all directions. He can have the people camped on the lower city and all spread out, and he can keep an eye on everything. The tabernacle and the Ark of the Covenant's on the lower city, sitting right there. And that's another subject for another day we could talk about.
Yeah.
But so here it is, and we have this very exciting find that we think is specifically identifiable as a building, Beth-jeshimoth, named in the Bible. And to think that Joshua and Moses would have used that, I think they would have used it as a command camp. It dates to the exact time. And not only that, somebody torched this thing on the way out. We found big burned beams and all kinds of stuff. Just a big pile of bricks were in a big pile of ruins, and it just piles up. Nothing on the outside. It just trails off to nothing. There's a big pile of ruins. So it's just like they burned the whole thing, it fell down, and there it is. And we excavated through it, and it was amazing. One of the most amazing finds I've ever seen was like furniture.
Yeah.
Carbonized furniture on the floor. It was amazing.
Yeah, it really was.
I mean, you could see the shape of the chair legs and all of that. And to think that if Moses co-opted that building, it's possible. He could have sat in that chair. I mean, we just don't know. I mean, it sounds crazy maybe to some people to say that, but it's not impossible. If Moses was there and he co-opted this building, he probably sat at every chair and maybe wrote the book of Deuteronomy at the table. I don't know. But it's kind of fun to think about that. But I think every argument would point to the fact that this is Abel-shittim, el-Hammam, the lower tell, Abel-shittim, and the upper tell, this building itself, is the house of the desolation.
So we have this wonderful biblical event described in Israelites going into the promised land, last place they camped, and here we think we found it. We're looking for Sodom, but as archaeologists, you take what you get and you try to understand it, and we think we found city of Sodom. We think we found Abel-shittim. We think we found Beth-jeshimoth. The Bible can be trusted, and every day archaeologists find more cool stuff. Stay tuned, come back with us again. We got more to talk about.